Question number 6, John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, has the gap between GDP per capita in Australia and GDP per capita in New Zealand narrowed or widened since his government came to office?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, since the September 2008 quarter, real GDP per capita in New Zealand has fallen by 2.9%, while real GDP per capita in Australia has fallen by 0.3%. This reflects the fact that we inherited a recession from the previous government which Australia didn't have, combined with Australia's unprecedented minerals boom. However, these figures do move around from year to year and quarter to quarter and will continue to do so. For example, in the first quarter of this year, the New Zealand economy looks like it has grown a little, while the Australian economy has shrunk 1.2%. In the long term, we believe that sound policies and careful and considered decision-making will mean that we will close this gap with Australia over time, and the resilience the economy has shown in recent times is a positive indicator towards that.
John Boscawen.
Supplementary to the Minister of Finance, given that he has just acknowledged that the gap between New Zealand and Australia has widened in the last 2.5 years of his administration, is it still the concrete goal of the government to close the income gap with Australia by 2025? If not, why not?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, it is still the goal of this government. And I would point out to the member, as he may well be aware, that the 2025 task force, which was set up to consider how to close this gap, noted that year-to-year fluctuations in the income gap will occur, but may or may not reflect the relative merits of the policy frameworks in the two countries. For this reason, changes in the income gap are more accurately assessed over the medium term. And as I say, I refer that member to the 2025 task force.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, if it does remain the government's goal to close the gap with Australia, how long does he think it will take to do that? And when will he give the public targets and milestones, given that New Zealand's GDP has fallen 3% since his government came to power, that the wage gap has widened from 30 to 35% of GDP since 2008, and that a record number of New Zealanders are now voting with their feet and contributing to Australia's economy, not ours?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, the member is wrong on a number of counts, as my colleague Mr Power referred to in relation to the numbers in the previous question. Also, the member persists in using before-tax incomes for a comparator with Australia, which is again misleading. And I'm surprised, actually, that the member wants to pop up and complain about the performance of the New Zealand economy when his government was responsible for the mess that we inherited in 2000, at the end of 2008.
John Boscawen.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, what has to be the productivity growth rate to achieve his government's concrete goal of closing the income gap, and does he think it's feasible with current policy settings?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I don't have that exact figure here, but I think there is a significant improvement in productivity required, and that's why we're taking the steps that we're taking. So, for example, a much more competitive tax system, better regulatory reform, which the member's colleague has been involved in to actually reduce the cost of doing business, investing in infrastructure that will improve productivity across the economy, particularly in the bottlenecks of areas like transport and telecommunications. Ensuring more productivity in the public sector is something that this government is very, very focused on. Improving trade opportunities. The Prime Minister, of course, is going to India next week, and improving education and skills. All those things, which is the policy prescription, will improve productivity over time.
John, point of order, John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question basically had two prongs to it, and the Minister actually refused to answer either particular question. He could have answered one or the other, but he answered neither. In particular, Mr Speaker, I asked him what the productivity growth rate was, and he acknowledged he didn't know the productivity growth rate required to close the income gap. He acknowledged he didn't know what it was. I then said, does he believe that the current policy settings were feasible? He went on to outline a number of policy settings.
Order. I'm not going to let the member litigate it any further by way of point of order. The first part of the member's question was answered. The member may not like the answer, but it was answered. And and I can't assist any further with that. The member has further supplementary, though.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. With
Point of order,
respect,
John Boscawen.
the Minister actually acknowledged he didn't answer it because the first part of my question...
No. I'm not going to have the member arguing with me. He asked the Minister what productivity growth requirement was required to achieve the closing income gap by 2025, whatever it was, and the Minister answered. He said he didn't know that, or didn't have the actual figure for that, and that is a perfectly reasonable answer for the Minister to give. And as for the second part, the Minister did go on to attempt to answer it when he didn't actually have to. Supplementary question, John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister of Finance. Does he believe the government's concrete goal of closing the income gap with Australia by 2025, set at the start of this administration, was a good idea? If not, why not?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I'm not sure about this whole setting and concrete thing, but it is the government's goal. It continues to be the government's goal. It is absolutely something that we're seeking to do, and as I explained to the member, a number of major policy settings have been enacted in the first period that this government has been in office that we'll be putting to the country as evidence of how we are moving to close that gap.
Question number 7, Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you.